communications there with Richard, as you can see. We'll try and get back to him shortly. Let's move back to domestic politics, though, for the moment, and look at the Sinodinos matter, which has dominated the focus over the last couple of days. With me, Labor's Nick Champion and Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer. Kelly, you've heard what Tony Burke had to say and other Labor figures. Should Tony Abbott give a full outline of what he's known about this matter and when?
Well, I think it's pretty disgusting what Tony Burke is trying to do, which is trying to smear and dirt a highly respected individual, Arthur Sinodinos. Arthur Sinodinos has done exactly the right thing. In fact, he's done something that other Labor members would not do, which is to stand aside while he is a witness at ICAC. He has had a really distinguished career thus far, and his career, when he resumes as a minister, will continue to be just as distinguished. But the Labor's attempts to try and dirt and smear a highly respected member of our team is just pure politics, and frankly really is beneath Tony Burke and Bill Shorten, and I think Bill Shorten should distance himself from it.
Nick Champion, well, far from doing that, that was the focus in question time as well of the Labor Party. There's been, at this stage, no concrete allegation against Senator Sinodinos of wrongdoing, has there? You'd concede that, wouldn't you?
Well, sure, I concede that, and he's simply a witness in this matter. But I haven't been following the events particularly closely, I've got to say. Look, I guess all we're asking for is for the Prime Minister to provide some account of, you know, the change in rhetoric, the change in actions between yesterday and today. And yesterday we had all this rhetoric about being in the trenches, and that signifies something to the public, to the media, to the opposition about, you know, sticking to your guns. The very next day we have a different outcome. Now, it's not unreasonable for the opposition, for the media, for the country to ask, well, you know, what changed?
Well, we'll continue on this in just a moment.
I don't think it's in the least bit damaging
for us. Richard, the UN Security Council has met this morning, nations like Australia expressing their concerns. What's been the reaction from Russia?
Well, the Russian ambassador took on all comers in this latest Security Council session, the 8th since this crisis got underway. Ambassador Churkin of Russia dueled verbally with the Ukrainian ambassador and with his fellow permanent Security Council member, Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador, and also the French ambassador. The French later were objecting to the, quote, triumphalism tone of Churkin's remarks, where he laid out the election results in Crimea and said that Crimea is now back in Moscow's hands, which is where it was supposed to be. The Russian ambassador had a very furious exchange of words with U.S. Ambassador Power. I've been here a lot of years, and it's been a while since I've seen it get so personal with their names being used. Basically, Samantha Power compared Churkin of Russia, his remarks, to some of the fiction of Tolstoy and other famous Russian literary authors. And the Russian ambassador afterward was very upset and said this could threaten how Russia engages on other issues. After he left the Security Council, the Russian ambassador said he's expecting an apology from the U.S. ambassador.
But the fact is, Richard, regardless of what resolution is undertaken or moved there at the Security Council, it's vetoed anyway, isn't it, by Russia? What other options are there for the international community?
It will be a role of the UN if the parties want the UN to come in, be that honest broker. Someone in Ukraine was asking about a demilitarized zone between Ukraine and Russia. Don't think that will happen. The official said only then would Ukraine pull its forces out of Crimea. The Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is flying as we speak to Russia in the morning, Thursday, in Moscow. He will meet with President Putin. Then the next day he goes to Ukraine. I think it's a long shot. I think some people are hoping he can set up a shuttle diplomacy in an effort to get Ukraine and Russia to talk face to face. Russia has rebuffed all efforts on that score.
Richard, thank you for your time from New York this morning. Appreciate it. Let's get back to domestic politics now and to Kelly O'Dwyer on this situation around Arthur Sinodinos. Now, he stood aside, and as Nick has conceded and many others have pointed out, there's no concrete allegation of wrongdoing. Others, however...
That's a pretty fundamental point.
It's a fundamental point. There is another point being made, though, that it's naive to be engaging in a company like that while you're president of the Liberal Party and to not know the ownership, not know that funds were coming into the Liberal Party or
these matters-
from that same company that he was the chairman of.
Arthur Sinodinos himself has said he's happy to appear before ICAC. He is happy to give evidence. He is cooperating. He'll provide evidence to ICAC in the ordinary course of events. But you're absolutely right to say there is no allegation of any impropriety that has been put about Arthur Sinodinos. We've had Doug Cameron appear before ICAC, Greg Combet appear before ICAC. We didn't get down in the gutter the way that the Labor Party has done today and yesterday in trying to smear these people in the way that they're trying to do now. But Arthur Sinodinos has done exactly the right thing. He said, you know what, I don't want to be a distraction for the government. I'm going to stand aside for the period of time while this process is taking place. You know, I think he's an incredibly honourable man.
Is it fair to say that Labor, a lot of people would be asking, how can Labor, you know, even raise a finger here, given its record, particularly in New South Wales?
Well, we all know that's not the way the political system works. I mean, oppositions hold governments to account, governments hold oppositions to account. That's the way the system works. All we're really asking for is the Prime Minister to explain the passage of events in the last 24
But what's
hours.
he done wrong?
And look, let me give you an
What's he
example,
done
Kelly.
wrong?
You talked about Labor and government and all the rest of it. The former Prime Minister had to give a 45-minute press conference or something like that about events that happened 20 years before. So if it's good enough for former Prime Ministers to have to account for things to the press, it's good enough for the Prime Minister to answer one 3-minute question in question time. I mean, that's all we're asking for.
No. This is a
outline
dirty,
the course of
this is a
events.
dirty political smear campaign. No allegations. Not one person. Not one person in the opposition has actually accused Arthur Sinodinos of having done anything wrong. Tell me, what is the allegation that you are putting about Arthur Sinodinos?
I'm not putting any allegation.
Exactly right.
I'm not putting any
This
allegation.
is a smear campaign.
I'm just asking the Prime Minister to account for the appointment of his ministry.
Campaign.
Well, what about to that question, though, Kelly, that on the day before, Mr Abbott expressed full confidence, no doubt at all.
He hasn't changed from that.
The next day, Sinodinos stood aside. They're saying what's the change in that 24 hours? Is it just the political pressure, the media pressure?
Well, Arthur Sinodinos has clearly made a decision that he doesn't want to be a distraction for the government, knowing as he does the way that the Labor machine operates, knowing that they engage in these gutter campaigns. Frankly, I think it's pretty disgusting. As I've said before, no allegations been put. I think, frankly, you're very uncomfortable with this, Nick, because clearly you're not as gung ho. You're not as gung ho as a number of other people.
But I think your tone of sort of high dudgeon is a little much, Kelly. All we're doing is asking questions. That's what oppositions do. It's not wrong for the opposition to ask questions. That's the way the system operates.
We've got a little bit of Christopher Pyne speaking on the doors of Parliament House this morning, and he was asked whether or not this episode was damaging for the government.
The Labor Party would like to try and make a hay out of this issue to do with Arthur Sinodinos, but let's not forget, they protected Craig Thomson for months, if not years, after the public was aware of a serious investigation surrounding his use of Health Service Union workers' money. Labor should not be lecturing anybody about standards. Steve Conroy, Greg Combet, Doug Cameron, Tony Burke all appear before the Independent Commission against Corruption.
That's not actually the comment I wanted. The comment of Christopher Pyne that I did want, and I'll tell you now, he basically said that he doesn't think it is damaging, that this is removing that distraction from the economic agenda that the government is trying to prosecute. But surely at that level, when you've got the Assistant Treasurer, a member of the Expenditure Review Committee, removed in the budget preparation phase, that can't help.
Well, look, they do want to distract from the government's agenda. I mean, we had some great announcements only this week. We announced our repeal day next week. A number of pieces of legislation were brought into the Parliament only yesterday. The Prime Minister gave a speech about how we're getting rid of thousands and thousands of pieces of useless regulation, red tape that's tying up business. Now,
but surely, to the question though, Sinodinos a key part, or the expenditure review committee is not that big. He's the assistant treasurer. This is just a couple of months out from Joe Hockey's first budget. This is going to be a massive
Who's going to find the cuts?
There's no question.
Kelly, who's going to find all those cuts? They have to. They'll have to find someone.
Okay, so you go from a smear campaign to a scare campaign. It's good to see that the Labor Party is right on message.
At least you
Let's hear
commission
Kelly,
order.
mate, please.
I'm happy to respond to the question, Kieran. Look, Arthur Sinodinos, very important part of the government, but we have a lot of talented people in our team. Matthias Cormann is the finance minister. He will take on those responsibilities. He is more than capable of taking on those increased responsibilities. And you're right to say that we have a big task ahead of us in preparation of the budget. If we were to do nothing but continue along the same track that we were left with when we inherited government, we'd have more than $600 billion in gross debt.
Okay.
This is a situation we need to correct and correct.
I want to
fast.
ask Nick, finally, I know that you've been watching closely the South Australian election outcome. Indeed. What is the latest? Can you tell us? And it doesn't look likely, does it, that the Labor Party will form government?
I don't think any of the seats will fall in a manner differently to what we expected on election night. Some of the margins are closing somewhat, but it would take an Herculean effort by one of the parties to overturn the results in Colton or Mitchell. Or some of the other seats there. So it's likely that Labor will have a majority of seats, which obviously is a pretty good outcome for the Labor Party. And if I was in the Liberal Party, I'd be asking some serious questions about their South Australian division. Because
what are you hearing about the independents?
Well, look, I think they're going to make up their own minds and they're going to hold their cards pretty close to their chest because it's in their, negotiating interest.
So it's still possible Weatherall could form government there, in your view?
I think the party that gets 23 seats is definitely in the box position to provide stable government to South Australia. So I think it's really watch for that figure. But if I was in the Liberal Party, I'd be looking pretty closely at my South Australian division because they, really ballsed it up.
Well, they got 53% of the two-party preferred.
And they lost most of the marginal seats.
Of the two-party preferred vote, which means that the majority of South Australians want to see a Liberal government formed in South Australia.
What it means is they got a big margins in seats they already held, and they lost ground in the marginal seats.
It doesn't show that the system's broken?
It doesn't show the system's broken at all. We've got an independent commissioner who draws the boundaries every time to make sure that it's fair. This was a system that was set up in 1989 by the Liberal opposition and independents, not by the Labor Party, so it's a very fair system. It's just the Liberal Party can't campaign very well in South Australia.
They can everywhere else because they're obviously in government federally. Nick Champion, thanks so much, and Kelly O'Dwyer, appreciate it. Have a good day.
Great.
Quick break on AIM Agenda.